Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Dental Community Resources Tuesdays at 2. This is our sixth webinar. For those of you who have joined us before, we have, over the last 6 weeks, brought together a group of members of our faculty to make sense of the information as it emerges and its impact on care at the time. For those of you who are new to us, the Dental Community Resource was established a year ago in March of 2019 to provide information relevant to dentists and the dental team. Ever since the COVID pandemic has struck, we've focused our attention on trying to unpack and make sense of information relevant to emergency care. I want to thank the members of our faculty who continue to work behind the scenes to bring the information, collect it and synthesize it. A lot of people who work very hard from one week to the next. And these are people some of you have met in the course of your interaction with us this past year. I'd like to also start off by reminding everybody, as we start to hear in the news of provinces starting to open up, like Saskatchewan, which opens up on May 4th, and Newfoundland, that the number of cases in these provinces are significantly lower than they are in the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, and to a much lesser extent, Alberta and British Columbia. There's no doubt that that has influenced the public health authorities in those provinces as far as their decision making. Also want to look at the demographics, the age distribution of COVID positive patients in Canada, with a change from last week in the increased number of patients in the 80 plus age group. So today, week 6, the theme of our webinar is an understanding of the latest RCDSO guidelines that were provided to us as an update on emergency and the introduction of the term urgent care, urgent dental care. This is the document I'm referring to. And I'm sure last Friday at 9 o'clock, as you checked the RCDSO website, you found this document, which was later emailed to us. And I'd like to start off by asking Steve and Manor to comment a little bit about their personal response to this when this document populated their inbox.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, John. I have to say, and hello, by the way, to everyone. Thank you for joining us. When I got this on Friday morning, at first, there's some sections of it that almost startled me or worried me. And then as I started reading about this and then thinking about it and picturing what to do in the practice, I have to say I was actually very relieved that finally we had more information, more specific information about what to do. So for me, as much as there might be nuances here and there, it is what it is. We gotta deal with this situation, and I was actually relieved. And you deal with it, you adapt to it, and you move forward. And that's what I've done already in practice this week yesterday.
And for me, I think the most important part that I missed on the initial read and had to go back and do a reread was I understood this wasn't a framework for opening up in the future. This was a description of how we should manage emergencies and urgent care during this state of emergency only. And it does not indicate anything that's coming in the future. Although when I first read it, I have to admit, I thought, how can I go on practicing in the future like this? And it took me a few minutes to really understand what this was saying to us.
And I think that's such a valid point, right? Highlighting the fact that these instructions, these guidelines are germane to the state of emergency we're under currently. So let's try to unpack this together. We're very familiar with the earlier communication, the last one being on April 7th from the Royal College, which helps identify what an emergency was described as. And once again, it's a potentially life-threatening condition that requires immediate treatment. And these 4 criteria are very well defined for us and easy for us to understand. What we didn't have at that time, which I'm so happy to see, and this is new to us, this concept of urgent dental care, which once again is now defined for us as the management and treatment of conditions that require immediate attention to relieve pain and or the risk of infection. Manor covered some of these topics in his webinar a week ago. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's now giving us some direction. We clearly identified in week 3 of our webinars that once we move to this long-term separation from our patients, we were going to have to need to provide urgent care that didn't fit into the limited emergency care description we had. What's also, I think, important to highlight in this document is the description of what is non-essential care. Non-essential care for the first time is actually also being spelled out. This is a new part to the guidelines that we have not seen before. And here we're focusing on the provision of routine or non-urgent procedures. A list of them, again, clearly not an exhaustive list, but we can understand from these recommendations that these things are not something that we should be engaged in. One question has come up in discussions we've had internally about the fact that patients have asymptomatic carious lesions, and if it's considered to be non-essential at this time, what's going to become of these teeth specifically as this pandemic continues to force us in our homes?
John, if I can tell you that I was actually very pleased to see we had called for it, I think in our third seminar, that there was a real need for some urgent care beyond the strict definition of emergency care. And I was pleased to see that the college addressed that concern. And I understand the opposite side of that concern is people can look at this and sort of find enough gray areas that they can go back into practice. And I think this list of what's non-essential care really is telling us exactly the framework we need to stay in. We need to look after our patients in the emergency and urgent aspect of this. This is not an opportunity for us to go back into business and open our clinics. And then if you keep that in mind when you read the rest of the document, it all kind of fits into place. I think this was rather well done, and it was something we were calling for, and it was actually quite pleased to see it in this document.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Steve. I think the weeks where there was a gap of not having that direction, I think has now been addressed with the specifics of these three categories. We were also reminded of our professional, legal, and ethical responsibilities to arrange for dental emergency and urgent care for our patients, whether it's us providing it ourselves, and we'll go into those details, or making sure that patients can reach us and communicate with us, and for us to triage them to colleagues in our community. Also know that if patients test positive for COVID-19 infection, we've been given direction on how to help them manage and navigate our healthcare system. But if a patient indeed screens negative on the phone or via virtual remote management, and we feel the need to see them, we're given specific instructions, which I'm going to expand on in just a moment. So a new component to these guidelines is an expanded explanation of aerosols. And this is important for us to read carefully and to pause for a moment. First of all, we can't overstate the fact that aerosol generating procedures should be avoided at this time because they are known high risk for COVID transmission. I'll repeat that: aerosol generating procedures should be avoided. How are aerosols generated? Obviously by high speed, low speed, and other rotary handpieces, as well as air water syringes. So if you stop and think for a second, anything you would do in the realm of urgent and emergency care that requires a high speed, a low speed, and an air water syringe, it puts you in the frame of mind of what we're speaking about, because matched to this is a specific need of the appropriate personal protective equipment for us and any staff members that are going to be joining us to take care of these patients. I like what the college has done here in creating two scenarios. They've separated them into scenario one, which describes an emergency or urgent condition that can be managed without generating an aerosol. They describe the specific PPE, which I'll elaborate on. And what's new here is the recommendation to the guideline to avoid using low-speed handpieces because of the potential for generating an aerosol. And this is something that we have not seen before. Steve, maybe you can comment, because the emergencies I know you've been managing have revolved around non-aerosol generating procedures.
Yeah, almost entirely for this 6 weeks where we've been managing mostly broken prosthesis, we've managed to avoid what we thought was aerosol. However, the odd time we needed in very limited indications to remove some access holes and things where we were using slow speed handpiece. And now we have to rethink that and see if there's another way we can do it or do it more judicious. Because I wasn't aware that slow speed handpieces could also generate aerosol. I don't know. The recommendation was always avoiding high speed, but I'm glad they helped us look at this a little bit differently as well.
The second, so to summarize this then, for this scenario, in other words, if we decide to provide emergency or urgent care that can be managed without generating an aerosol, this is what we need. This is the PPE right out of the guidelines: the surgical mask, gloves, and then eye protection and or a face shield. We are told to not use a high-speed handpiece, to not use air water syringe, and to avoid low-speed handpieces also. This is in contrast now to the second scenario, and here we're dealing with a scenario where the emergency or urgent condition cannot be managed without generating an aerosol. In other words, the emergency or urgent condition demands an aerosol generating procedure. We've identified the PPE, which I'll elaborate on, recommend, if possible, use of rubber dam, as Manor mentioned, again, reminded us of last week with high volume suction. And a new component here to these descriptions, which features the description of the operatory itself, ideally having floor-to-ceiling walls and ideally a door. So they're saying that all aerosol-generating procedures must be performed in an operatory with floor-to-ceiling walls and ideally a door, which remain closed during and after such procedures. This is the new directive to us. And Manor, because of the nature of what you do as an endodontist, maybe you can comment on what this has been like since yesterday, fresh after receiving these recommendations for the weekend. You indeed were engaged in taking care of these kinds of emergency procedures.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, so this was, again, in some ways a relief to finally have more explicit guidelines to follow. And sure enough, yesterday, following these guidelines, we were seeing emergency endodontic cases. Quite a learning experience. Having to work with an N95 mask, and somehow I have been fitted for a N95 mask and putting on my loops and all these things. And it's, it takes some time to adapt to it, but you have to, you book maybe extra time. It might be a bit of a pain in the neck. And I've spoken to a lot of colleagues already who have said, forget, I'm going to use an, maybe many people I hear this from, level 3 mask, or I don't need such and such. And I don't need to wait 3 hours or whatnot between patients. I know you'll touch upon that soon, but it is what it is. We need to adapt to it and we need to modify it. Like my operatories look so bare right now. It's just white walls. I've already been adapting to all these things with me, my team. I have to say, even though, thank God I did not get my COVID when I got infected from a patient. I did not. It was travel related, unequivocally, and confirmed by public health and everyone else. I have to say, it's not like it was fun going back to work, because it's like having a gray cloud over my head with that bit of actually not a bit, a lot of concern for the well-being of my staff and the patients. Like we really have to be vigilant. I have to be constantly on top of my staff for our entire protocol from the moment the patient calls and even screening these patients. It's been, yeah, it's tougher, but it is what it is. And we adapt to it, we move forward, and we have to look after our patients, period.
Thanks, Manor. So just to summarize then, if we are seeing a patient for an emergency or urgent condition which cannot be managed without generating an aerosol, this is the PPE we must have. Fit-tested N95 mask, gloves, eye protection, and a face shield, and a protective gown. This is right out of the document. If possible, use a rubber dam. An operatory with floor-to-ceiling walls are what is required, and ideally a door. The document goes on to provide us with appropriate precautions, which regard the management of patients, and some guidelines in terms of how to deal with the actual scheduling, managing where patients wait, how we treat our waiting rooms, and to make sure that when patients come to our office that we repeat the screening for COVID-19 with temperature recording, whether we're using a non-contact infrared thermometer or having the patient take and report their temperature with their own thermometer while they're waiting outside our practices. Some other recommendations about accompanying family members, the need for appropriate hand hygiene, and a new component to the guidelines is having each patient rinse with 1% hydrogen peroxide for 30 seconds prior to the examination of the oral cavity. And that, again, and one other recommendation is obviously to follow up with hand hygiene with an alcohol-based hand rub before leaving our practices.
John, if I can
jump in there.
If I can comment on the mouth rinse, we've been having lots of calls to our practice asking what we've been doing, and all kinds of different articles are being published talking about different possible solutions, chlorhexidine, betadine, all kinds of different solutions. I'm glad the college gave us a guideline. You can do or believe this or not believe this. You can believe you need to do something else on top of this, but if you're going to see patients during this period of time, then that is a requirement. And I'm glad that that's written out there so that debate, at least for now, can end. And this is the minimum requirement that we need to follow.
Yes,
absolutely.
If I may add to that, I'm
yes,
sorry, gentlemen. Steve, I completely agree with you. The point I want to highlight about this mouth rinse is a week ago I gave the presentation, and when you see the studies out there, recommendations from scientific papers, chlorhexidine, all of a sudden now, 3 days later, it was changed to hydrogen peroxide. My point is, I can't stress enough to our audience and our colleagues how important it is to stay up to date. You know, in 1 week or 3 weeks, this might completely change. So if you're going to be seeing patients that very morning, you may want to just look again at what are the guidelines, because it shows you how fluid this whole situation is. You need to stay up to date. I can't stress that enough with what the licensing body and our governing bodies and public health is saying. And so, yeah, I am also relieved that now I know 1% hydrogen peroxide, done. Great to have this information very, very clearly stated.
I'm glad they clarified this, because I've been inundated with betadine and spray or gargle, and where are you getting it and which one should I buy? And it's not things that any of us can answer. We need to leave this to public health, who will then recommend it to the college, who will then put it in guidelines. I think this is just a great example of us not jumping the gun, not trying to anticipate what this is going to look like when we get back to normal, because we're not given that information yet. And maybe, truthfully, public health doesn't know. The college is going to need recommendations from public health. We might just be too early to be focused so much on that. And I know as dentists, we love to focus on that. But let's just try to keep that down a little bit as long as we can, because I think we'll make a lot of costly mistakes, a lot of stress on us that we could avoid if we just recognize where we are in the world right now and where we need to focus.
Absolutely. See, I could agree with you more. It's a reminder that we should get comfort, actually, out of this document, because now at least we're being told precisely what it is we need to use. So in summary, excuse me, the recommendation here in the guidelines are to stagger appointments and have patients wait in their car, remove magazines and toys from your waiting rooms, repeat the COVID screening with temperature recording when the patients present to our offices, have accompanying individuals wait in the car unless the patient you have to see needs somebody to assist them because they need assistance. Hand hygiene with 70 to 90% alcohol-based hand rub upon entering our practices, a 30-second rinse with 1% hydrogen peroxide, and hand hygiene again with a 70 to 90% alcohol-based hand rub before leaving our offices. What's also relevant, I think, to highlight in this document as far as the precautions regarding office and clinical procedures is the need for each office and clinical staff member to conduct and report their own self-assessment for COVID-19. And there's a link to that, which takes us to the Ministry of Health for the province of Ontario. And there's this COVID-19 self-assessment. The link's available for you that needs to be done. So this is now part and parcel with what care looks like during this phase of emergency and urgent care while we're in a state of emergency. They've also identified the appropriate PPE for staff working at our receptions, our administrative staff, and the recommendation for the same staff to open and close doors to minimize patient contact. So in summary, they recommend minimizing the number of dental staff present. I think that's intuitive. Looking at the self-assessment for COVID-19 for each office and clinical staff member provided by the Ministry of Health in Ontario. And they've identified the PPE for the administrative staff, our staff who work at our front desk. And that includes a procedure or surgical mask, the use of gloves, eye protection or a face shield. And they introduced the concept of a physical barrier such as a plexiglass shield. This document goes on to discuss, again, how the operatories need to be set up. As Manor said, they're pretty sparse. The recommendations, as we already touched upon in previous weeks, on the use of extraoral radiographs when possible. And they also reference the Public Health Ontario's appropriate steps for putting on and removing PPE. I'm going to share them with you. These documents are available on our site. They could be printed and laminated when the time comes for you to start doing the training with your own staff is a very useful. I'm not going to expand on the actual steps. They're very clearly identified. And just a reminder of how critical the taking off of the personal protective equipment is in terms of potential for contamination. Another important point that we're going to, sorry,
John, if I may quickly jump in there.
Yes, please.
Again, it's interesting being back in practice and seeing patients and seeing firsthand what all these guidelines mean. Something like eye protection and intraoral radiographs. I completely understand why the college says, yeah, you need these minimize intraoral radiographs. In terms of the face shield, even though taking a radiograph is not considered level scenario 2 kind of aerosol producing scenario, I'll tell you from experience. Yesterday we had a patient, we took an intraoral radiograph, and he happened to be a gagger, and he's coughing as we're taking that one radiograph, which shows you need to think even beyond this for the sake and safety of everyone, and even wear a face shield then, not just eye protection. So you need to be so vigilant, because right there is a scenario where, yeah, there's no aerosols, but you need to be exceptionally careful and still go maybe above and beyond what we're just being told. So, the intraoral radiograph, minimize them, but if you have to take them, consider just what else you can do to just for everyone's safety. And for us, it was realizing everyone we're taking an X-ray on, face shield, plus the glasses, face shield. So sorry to jump in there, but we need to be so careful with this.
That's a really important recommendation. Thank you, Manor. This document also, as far as the appropriate precautions, they've included the distinction between the cleaning and disinfection of an operatory after a non-aerosol generating procedure, along the lines of what Steve described to us, versus the cleaning and disinfection for aerosol generating procedures, and introduce this idea that if an operatory door is present, it should remain closed for 3 hours. This is the first time we're getting a sense of timing of how long a room needs to be left closed. I'm going to expand on that in just a moment. Also talk about the need for a twice daily cleaning and disinfection of high-touch surfaces. So let's summarize this together. We are being told in the guidelines to declutter our operatories, remove everything that doesn't need to be there, consider extraoral radiographs, go back and look at the Public Health Ontario donning and doffing of personal protective equipment, and the twice per day enhanced office cleaning and disinfection of high-touch surfaces. This is, I think, the one issue that probably created the most concern initially at the first read of this document. And this is the distinction between non-aerosol generating procedures and aerosol generating procedures as they relate to the cleaning and disinfection of the operatories.
John, if I could jump in here. When this document first came out, the phone started ringing just several minutes after, because people started to extrapolate, how can I run my business, my hygiene program, my regular operative program, having the room fallow for 3 hours after each one of the aerosol generating procedures that I'm going to do. And if you really this is where I had to look at this again and just stop for a minute and recognize that during the state of emergency, where we're only supposed to be seeing emergency and urgent care only, it's no problem for me to leave my room for 3 hours. I only see 2 patients a day at the most, maybe even 2 or 3 a week. If I need to close the door after I'm finished and leave it for a while, it shouldn't be a problem. And once you go back and read it, nowhere does this say that this will be standard of practice. That will depend on engineering and all kinds of other recommendations that will go part and parcel of this. I think the college or public health decided that we don't know what individual engineering people have in their rooms. Let's keep everybody safe and make a very extended period, which would allow the aerosol to settle and probably do the best chance of keeping everybody safe, despite the individual engineering requirements or what they have in there. That's the way I interpret this. And when I did, I felt a lot better about this document.
I think we all did, right, where we discussed this, because our initial reaction was that this seemed insurmountable. But reminding ourselves that these instructions are specifically for this period in time when we're under a state of emergency and only related to emergency and urgent care, it does make a lot of sense. It is definitely the safe approach, and I think we have to find some comfort in that.
However, when I did think about it for our colleague Manor, who unfortunately is where everybody sends their aerosol needing procedures, this I don't know how you felt you were going to deal with this, because truthfully, you're one of the only people that this really should affect.
Yeah, it was the moment I saw 3 hours, said, holy cow, between the treatment and then the 3 hours. Now it's a lengthy time. I'm limited in how many patients I can see now per day. It is what it is. It is for, listen, if it's meant for everyone's safety, this is how I accept it. And then there's a reason for it, and things might change. But what I did right away is I created a spreadsheet and saw how I could stagger patients amongst our operatories. And this is something for colleagues to think of doing if you're in a position where you will be seeing a lot of emergencies during the state of emergency. But I understand it.
Yeah, I think it's obviously an all-encompassing number that was going to keep us safe, despite the initial reaction that it seemed to be so difficult to deal with. Moving along with the unpacking of the document, there are some other precautions that we need to be reminded of. It's important to follow up with these emergency and urgent care patients 7 to 10 days after we see them, confirm that they're doing okay after our intervention, and that they're not demonstrating any COVID-19 symptoms. If they do, there's direction on where they should be directed to in terms of interacting with our medical colleagues. And if we do not have the required safety precautions and the appropriate PPE in place, that we still need to take care of these patients. This is a message that has come time and time again. The Royal College does not want patients calling them saying that they can't get access to care. Another very important reminder that we've been mentioning for these last 6 weeks is we want patients to not go to hospital departments for dental emergency or urgent care at this time, understanding how critical that is. The last paragraph here is a reminder too that we all play a role. We all have an important role to play as dentists, as a dental community during this pandemic, during the state of emergency. And that is obviously that if we're not able to see patients ourselves, then we are able to possibly donate supplies of PPE, and there's instructions on where to do that. So to basically, the summary for today's webinar is provided an understanding of the latest RCDSO interim guidelines for emergency and urgent care during the COVID-19 state of emergency. That's what that document is all about that we received on Friday, April 24th. And very importantly, an overriding theme throughout today's webinar is the reminder for us to be safe, and a reminder for us to contribute to the safety of our patients and our staff and our families. And if you wanted to add anything to this theme.
Yes, I think that when we think about this document, we are, all of us, many of us, are very concerned about the economic cost of all this and how we're going to recover, and how as soon as possible can we get back to generating some of our income and get out of the financial concerns that we're all facing. But this being safe is very much tied up in that. And I have to tell you the way that I think about it. And then Manor, I'd love you to give your perspective as well. We cannot afford as a profession, and I know what dentists are like. I'm one of them. If there's a way that I can maybe see a gray area, I'd like to do that. But I don't think that it's appropriate when we're talking about the safety of ourselves, our staff, and our patients, particularly, or not including our patients, and the reputation that the entire dental community will have if one of us is reckless. All we need when we're starting to get confidence back in building our businesses is somebody on CP24 to stand up there and say, I've got infected at my dental office. All of us will be affected terribly financially by that kind of discovery. I'm just urging all of our profession to really think about the long-term concern or problem if we're not safe, and how important it is that we follow guidelines, that we don't try to guess or second guess the authorities, that we really try to stay in our lane and keep everybody safe, because recovery may be difficult enough without those kind of setbacks. So that's my take on how we are going to try to approach this and be safe for the entire community as well as ourselves.
Yeah, Steve, I completely agree with you. I mean, it'll be tough enough reopening our practices, but if we lose the trust of the public in what we do, we're in trouble. And if anyone tries to be a little bit creative or with respect to how to manage things versus following the guidelines, whether it's a patient filing a complaint or a staff member filing a complaint, everyone's going to be suffering from this. As much as I totally understand, this is 7 weeks almost now. I mean, holy cow, it's a long time to be closed. I totally understand how tough it is on our colleagues. And then the other thing I might add is now I'm hearing more and more and more about you should buy this product and that product. And I've heard for $2,000, I can get this big elephant trunk of a high volume suction that's going to help with aerosols. I personally am staying away from all those things until I know exactly what I need according to the current guidelines. I'm not, as Steve was saying, I'm not going to second guess what we might or might not need about this situation that we're still learning things about. I would not start going out there and spending thousands of dollars and whatnot on things that we may not need whatsoever. So be careful and watch out for industry, with all due respect to them, for trying to push on us a lot of these products.
Yeah, I think now that we have these guidelines, I think it should be a source of comfort. Maybe after the initial reaction, after a second or sort of sober read of it, as we have done, as I'm sure you have done, and hopefully with today's unpacking of it, you can see that this is all within the spirit of keeping us safe, keeping our patients safe, keeping our staff and families safe too. And I think that's an important message we needed this guidance. I want to remind you, we started these focus group conversations 2 weeks ago. To date, we've we've had a chance to chat with about 45 to 50, I think it was 50 at last count, dentists across the province. It's been great to connect with you in a more intimate way. The 30 minutes typically go by really fast, but it's been really inspiring. It's been great to see the resolve and the dedication and the compassion that our colleagues, that you have for your patients and for your staff. For those of you who haven't joined us, please feel free to. You can sign up by signing up on the link available in the YouTube description for our Tuesdays at 2, or link on our homepage that looks like this, and just click on that and there'll be instructions on how to join the focus group conversations. There have been different topics, some familiar topics that have come up in these conversations, these small group conversations. One of them has been obviously the critical issue of PPE and what it's going to look like. Where can I get my hands on it? And we wanted to ask you, Steve Manor and I collectively, if there was any interest in the DCR looking at exploring the feasibility of any group purchase for PPE once it becomes defined moving forward for care when things are resumed. Please let us know. If it's something that has interest to you, then we can start the ball rolling in investigating that further. A reminder that all our information is available on our website. Please reach out to us via the email address community@dentalcommunity.ca. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. On behalf of Steve Manor and our whole DCR faculty, please join us next Tuesday at 2 on May the 5th. Be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.